I'm going to, well, since I know most of you in the room, and so many of you, I'm glad we're my friends. And I wanted to, my portion of this panel is to talk about race. And interestingly, I have consumed massive amounts of intellectual information on race in the last month, trying to prepare for this. And what I really found was that much of what's written and talked about is racism, which I don't want to talk about necessarily. So then I thought, well, I have no idea who's going to be in this audience, and now since I know who it is, I wanted to tell you about my own experience here in Mansfield. Some of you may have heard it, I don't know, but I wanted to tell you I'm a hometown girl. I'm 44 years old, and I've raised 4 children here. And my own life is probably the best. In other words, have you ever heard of people who are having surgery and they're having like this out-of-body experience and they're looking down? You know that how that goes. That's kind of how race has been with me through my whole life in this town. And so I was talking to my son tonight, and I was saying, I'm trying to think about the very first time I ever thought about race. And I'm thinking I had to have been quite young in elementary school. I always noticed differences, but I was raised one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And so unlike a lot of people, I was, our worship experience was very, very, very integrated. So I did not have that distance that, you know, how they talk about the Sunday segregation. I did not experience that as a child. Then I went to my neighborhood. I was born on the north end, and so I was surrounded by black people in my community. And I had 2 sets of grandparents who had a great influence in my life. And I had one set in South Carolina that I spent summers with, and the closest thing I could characterize them to is the Cosbys. My grandfather was a school principal, and my grandmother taught at a college, taught cosmetology at a beauty school. And here, my grandfather worked at the steel mill, and my grandmother was involved in community things and so forth, and she worked sometime. But really, my 4 grandparents probably shaped my perception of community. And so, after being a very nurtured kid, I went to Krevlin School over at O.C. Hill, what's O.C. Hill now. And I had this, after school I would go to Miss Shepherd's Daycare Center. And there was this woman who came in and who taught art to us, and her name was Diane Kay. And Diane Kay was Dr. Kay's wife, and she was telling Mrs. Shepherd about this new school, Discovery School, that had opened, and that I should go over there. And she thought, you know, I was a really good student, and I was probably in 2nd grade, I think. So we went over there. I took a test day there. I really can't remember that too much, but I remember going, and I remember knowing that I was the only black girl in this entire school, which was very small. There's probably more of you than it was in the whole school. But I remember noticing it, but I don't remember really having a judgment on it. Shortly after that, my parents divorced, and right after the divorce was final, my father brings home a white woman who was very loving and is still in my life to this day. This is 1978, well 76 when I met her. And so he brings home a white woman, and that was a different thing because now it's like family. Like I felt like they were gonna be together. So now I have people, and you all may have noticed I have these green eyes. And these eyes were a source of extreme pain throughout my entire life until I was in my mid-30s, because it made me not be able to identify really with people. So white people would say, oh, your eyes are so beautiful. And black people would say, oh, you have pretty eyes. But both people would say, well, what are you? Especially if I was with my mother, my stepmother, and my father. So I could always relate to, and both my parents are African American, so I could always relate to biracial kids and how they didn't, that I can totally relate to that. But that wasn't my own experience. I mean, that wasn't my situation. And I remember getting teased and called things by both races, just kid stuff. But the most profound racial thing happened to me when the movie Roots first came out. I'm an elementary school student at Discovery School. I'm the only, there were 2 boys that were in the school, but they had us separated and they were younger than me, so I was never around them. So I'm essentially the only black kid in this school. And one of the students came in, and we're all like, I don't know, 3rd, 4th grade, and he throws his coat on the floor and says, "Hey, Kizzy, get my coat." And I didn't know how to respond. I really didn't know how to respond. He had watched the movie just like I had. I knew Kizzy, what he was talking about. This is the same week that it's on. And I remember standing there and like, I started to pick the coat up because I've been taught to be polite. If someone dropped something, you hand it to them, but something wouldn't let me pick it up. And I was just like, I didn't know what to do. And so I went home that day and I asked my grandmother, and I got an entire education on indentured servants, and black people were not the only slaves, but I got the other side of the story, which was very helpful to me. I think that what I'm grateful for in all these stories is balance. I always got the opposite side. So I never had the luxury of saying white people do this, or white people are like that, or black people are like this, or black people are like that, because I had really been a recipient of kindness from everybody, pretty much, very early on in life. So this community supported me a lot, just in terms of how I looked at people, and that I didn't have to hold my head down, and I felt like the people, the adults who were involved in my life, whether they were teachers or parents, whatever race they were, I always felt like everybody was like, "Go, Deanna, go." But I did not see them doing that for other kids. I didn't see it like that. I didn't see other black girls on my street being the recipient of kindness like I was. And I didn't see, especially boys, I didn't see it. So I stayed there. I was at Discovery School. The group that I came to, my mom remarried, and I went to Appleseed Middle School. Again, wonderful experience for me. And that's always been the thing that stood out in this community, was it was wonderful for me. But it never seemed wonderful for many people that necessarily looked like me. And I've always been very aware of that. In my house, race was a daily issue. We talk about it all the time. We talked about it casually. We talked about it seriously. We talked about it religiously. We talked about it spiritually, politically, economically. We talk about race. With my children, we talk about it. But it's funny because as I was consuming all this information, as I said, trying to prepare something, and I was like, I can't present a scholarly anything on the subject of race. All I know is my own experience, and that's why I feel very comfortable to share all this with you today. So anyway, we talked about it a lot, and I realized as I was going through my senior book the other day how I had noted that in my high school book that I was the first or the only black student. And that was weird to me now as I look back. Why did I notice that? Why did I notice that? Because I was usually always the only one in my class. And that can really set you, as a black person in this community, that can really set you apart from even other black people. So you can have a very, I don't know what kind of existence it is, but it definitely affects what you do in your social life and all of that. Not that anyone makes you feel like an outcast or anything, but it's just that I've always noticed that only, or that I might be the only one in the room, or one of very few in the room. As a parent, it was terrifying. Raising black children in Mansfield, Ohio is scary if you have boys. If you look at any statistics, if you look at national statistics, if you look at state statistics, which I deliberately did not bring because I didn't want the conversation necessarily to hinge on that, but I have 3 sons, and I divorced, I separated in 1997, so since that time, my children are now, my oldest is 23, 22, 21, and my youngest will be 20. So I have 4 children in 4 years. And 3 of them are males, and it was the scariest thing. And it is why I ran for Mansfield City Council. It is why I got politically involved. It's why I got on the school board. It was for my mainly not even from my daughter as much, mainly from my sons, because the systemic issues that we face in this community, they're the most vulnerable thing. They seemed very vulnerable to me. So I ran for office because even though the community has been kind to me and been open and gracious and accepting and affirming to me, it does not feel that way if I were to just say in general, this is how this community is. It feels very segregated, very divided, it just doesn't feel that way. And so I did that. I ran for office and I got involved and have done all these things to try to extend what has been extended to me, and that is that, look, these people are really not that bad. And that's regardless of which group I'm talking to. It's just not that bad. It's a hell of a community. Wonderful people here. It is a shame that we're so divided in this community. It is a shame because you all miss out on something and black people miss out on something, and we can't build divided. And you know, I'm not a big, let's all get together. I'm not really that, but I really am a person who believes in the emergence of our personhood. I wrote that down as Aurelio was speaking, because that's the thing we really have to do. Today, as we were talking about it, any of you, I can give you a loan, or you can give me, you can give me a liver or whatever, so it's the same. It's the same. What has happened, and in doing all this research that I found, it was really, really fascinating to me. And if you want to see a great documentary on racism, there's an awesome one that PDC did. It's called The History of Racism. And it really talks about when race started to emerge as a big issue. And it was all about money. It was all about money. It wasn't anything about, we don't think these people can do, we think these people have no worth. It was strictly money. And the terms that we talk about racism in, here, our history is, well, I'll give you another example. Learning as a black student about history. Okay. Not fun, okay? Not fun. You can't really identify with it. It's not really, it doesn't belong to you. It's just like planting something. You need roots in the ground. And so when you have black students and young people, one thing with my own kids that I always stressed was our family, that you have these roots. You go deeper, there's something grounding you. And you can't take that back to just slavery, to say you're grounded by the roots of slaves. So I think that we almost have to just wipe that discussion out and again, let the personhood emerge, because you don't know who you are. My life has been full of diversity, full of it. I'm looking at my work, my colleague back there, volunteers from my office, board members in here, supporters, residents, neighbors, people in the community, that all of us basically want the same thing. And so it has been, race does play an issue, and it does matter. And when you go to a store or you go to a restaurant and you never see anyone black there, then that should tell you, in a town with 1 out of 5 black people, that somebody's highly unemployed. Where are they? And so it's just really easy to not see things. And I don't want to ramble on, but I did want to just give you one more quick story. So, and I don't even know what you're taking away from this, but I think that if we look at, Bill's question was educate or regulate and all of that, I think that this is really a tough one. And I think it's tough because there's no way to change it. You can't, there's just no way to change it. So you just either have to let it matter or not, basically. It's not going to change. My children, my children's children, my great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren will be black children, And unless those of you that are white in the room, unless you intermarry, yours will probably be white. So we will all exist, but I think that what we do with it is really important. How we look at it is really important. And I think that it's not really anything to organize around always. Some things, but the only things that organizing around race can affect are racism. It's the only way you can do it. So you're always going to be fighting something. You're always going to be, but in any other way, I really can't see where that makes a lot of sense. Where you would just organize around race, strictly race specific. You know, not even that. Certainly, white people organize around racist issues as well. But what I'm saying is, as Black people, as whatever people, whatever race we are, if we try to organize around that, it's our skin. We've organized around our skin. We're still, that we could all be mothers, we could all be victims of domestic violence, we could all be persons with disabilities, we could all be part of the LGBTQA community. I mean, you could be any of that, but it's, you know. So this did not go the way exactly how I wanted it, but I did just want to share that with you, and I wanted to share that, you know, one of the things that Bill and I talked about were how people address people. And I wanted to tell you a couple funny stories and what not to do. If you invite someone to speak at your event, don't have the person sit them in the lobby and tell them that people have purses in the room. You're the speaker, you're a city council member, and have someone say, you sit out here in the lobby because we haven't started and they have their purses in there. Don't do that. That was done to me in Mansfield, Ohio. And
I was getting nervous there for a minute.
Not you,
I
Bill.
didn't do that.
So yeah, don't do that. And definitely after someone speaks and they're talking about something, don't walk up and say, why do all Black people do? I don't think we all do anything alike but breathe. That's it. That's really it. And we all do that alike. So, you know, ask the person, be courteous. You apply the golden rule. You know, whoever you're talking to, pretend you're that person. And if we would just do that very simple thing and just self-correct and just pay attention, and Black people don't mind if you say, hey, you know what, I like your hair. People always, oh, I like your hair. You know, ask before you touch it. You know, don't crowd someone's face, but it's okay to ask the question, especially if it's going to make you more comfortable and make you interact better with people in the future and add maybe quality of life for you. So, you know, don't be afraid to ask questions. If you ever had, I'm like that person. I'm always like, yeah, you can ask. If you have a Black person question, you can ask me. I don't get offended. I've dealt with it literally all life. Not everyone's going to be that way.
I may have made a comment about how beautiful your eyes are, but I don't know.
Maybe.
And
you say thank you, right?
You're a stunningly beautiful woman.
And she's straight.
And I
It's not offensive. Let me just go back. The story with the eyes are that when I was young, I went to my aunt's house in Tennessee. There was a picture on the wall, black and white photo, of a woman whose hair was exactly like mine. She had her hair in 2 ponytails, and I did. And I was probably about 8 years old. And I looked and I said, oh my goodness, you got my picture up here. Because it really looked like me. And it was my grandfather's grandmother. And we were at his sister's house, and she said, that was my grandmother. And I could tell by the shading that the eyes were light. And my grandfather, we all have different colored eyes. And we looked at it. I looked at the picture, and I said, were her eyes green? And she says, yeah, old master was in the wood pile.
Oh.
And when she said that, which Black people will say we might talk like that. We will say that. What it meant, what it did for me was immediately made me hate my eyes. It made me feel like they were like this scar of slavery. That's what it looked like. It looked like I got, this is the mark of rape or something. And so it wasn't until I was literally in my mid-30s that I really made myself look at him and not feel bad about him, because I got teased about him, I got talked about him, and most people are like, why would you say that? But I really, for many years, with this race thing, this set me apart. It set me apart. And, that's just maybe typical kid stuff too, but So no, it's not offensive. Thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, I want to be gracious. Yeah, it's.
I'd like to ask
Thank
a
you.
question.
Wait a minute, they
I was wondering if you feel prison reform is an important topic right now, and are you involved with the injustice to the black community in our penal system?
I would say not directly, not as much as I probably should be. I am mortified that so many of our young men end up in prison. I think it's horrible, and it was the single most scary thing as a mother. I literally moved from Mansfield to Ontario because in the neighborhood where we lived, I would see police cars just driving slowly by a group of black boys. I have 3, and they're all, like I said, very close in age, and I just remember thinking, I'm more afraid of that than I am of somebody in the neighborhood actually doing anything. I was afraid of the education that they would get. I was afraid of so many things. They're very vulnerable, and they're the thing that everyone's so afraid of, but they're, that was big with me. And prison reform, absolutely. I think disparate sentencing and all of those things are issues that have to change. Absolutely.
It's not the prison, it's the society that's sending them to prison.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
It's causing them to be in a situation where they,
We set people up. We don't give them jobs. We don't give them an opportunity for education. We won't invest $5,000 in them when they're young, but we'll spend $30,000 a year to put them away.
Hey,
Right.
Something messed up.
And it's interesting because Aurelio said something that really hit home with me. As a young person, especially at Discovery School, we worked a lot with the New Hope. I remember going there every Wednesday. And so I was raised to be extremely sensitive to persons with disabilities, not necessarily, not in a pitying way at all, because I did work with them a lot. But it always amazed me at how I would hear, he brought this up, the support in the community. That people look and they say, oh, we should do this, and we feel good about ourselves, and we should, create as many opportunities. And so we make that happen, and we deal with them at their highest level. And we don't do that a lot of times with African American men. Not at all. I mean, who's breaking down doors to start job training programs? Nobody.
I know you said you don't feel like grouping by race is effective or useful, but I feel like the reason the civil rights movement and really the advancement of minorities has stalled is because of white privilege. And I feel like the real elephant in the room is that white people don't own the fact that we got a golden ticket the day we came out of the womb with white skin. And you can be unconscious of that privilege to a certain point, but at some point, I just can't believe, because I've been on the earth long enough, at some point, I just can't imagine that every white person doesn't realize, wait a minute, it's a little bit easier for me. And so, I don't know what the answer is, but I know that that's something we have to own. And it's ours. That's completely ours. Racism is a white people problem. And we have to own it.
Can I come into that? Because I actually disagree with that. And I think, I already lost my own train of thought. That's so I think the difference here is, I think perhaps maybe in a smaller community that's more of an issue, but you're making this into an issue of what we might call survivor guilt. And I think the fact that, that is your God-given identity is one thing. And I think to just feel guilty or to be apologetic for it is not purposeful. So I think the civil rights movement would have never happened. Martin Luther King would have never brought that march to Washington without an enormous amount of white support. And the idea is to keep that train moving.
Well, I agree, but I think that a good chunk of white people think we've arrived. I think that they think that we're there, that we passed these laws and it's failed.
I think you are right.
I think a lot of people are bigoted about a lot of things, but I don't think we can talk about the race issue by carving out that niche, which is clearly behind the times and not appreciative of the world that they live in. Yeah, there's that bigot part of society that does that.
Shouldn't be in our Supreme Court, however.
Great.
Our Supreme Court.
Well, yeah, the word what comes by is over here. James.
Yeah, you just called, I think you got called on.
You just called on.
Question. Go back 4 generations and see could your grandparents purchase life insurance? Mine could. If you was white, you could. Go back another 3 or 4 generations and see could your foreparents purchase property? Mine could. Yours could. Fast forward to today. Who's doing the hiring? It's not me. So there is a big chunk of white folks who were still benefiting from slavery, whether we want to admit it or not.
And I think that might be very true, but I can tell you right now in Columbus, recruitment and retention of qualified employees is an enormous issue. And when you look at employers like Nationwide or Cardinal Health or Battelle or Chase Bank, they really don't care what color your skin is.
Yeah, because
They care about your qualifications,
Yeah,
so the
different
issue
people.
becomes education and preparation.
When I do my tours, that's one thing with young kids today. You have different people doing the hiring that wasn't born here. I'm not knocking folks that coming from elsewhere. They wasn't born here. They could care less about what your granddaddy looked like, how much money he had. Now you go to Cleveland, they've always basically been that way. Historically, Cleveland have always been further advanced by how white folks than Columbus were. Okay, because if you read the book about when John Finney, the slave catchers came in, they went to Columbus. He wanted to go to Cleveland because Cleveland was more open-minded towards runaway slaves. The point that I really want to try to bring up is that there's 2 types of racism within our community. I'm a black male, okay, and Sister Deanna. I am a super black male.
Yeah, I was confused.
The point I'm trying to make is that a black man is treated different from a black lady. His opportunities is less than a black female. If 3 black men are seen walking the street together talking, and we better not be talking real loud, you have officers going to come and want to know what you're doing. My wife's kid, myself, they went to St. Pete's. Our daughter was the first black person to go to Montessori and go all the way through. Our son, same thing. Vicky was treated completely different from Jamie. Jamie was a straight A student up to the 8th grade. They didn't want to accuse him of being carried by his white friend. They said, no way. This young man struggled. If he did this, he got every reward St. Pete's had to offer. But they want to try to say he didn't get it fairly. But they never questioned my daughter Vicky. So, and one thing that was stated to my son is that the reason people was against him with disabilities was because they was afraid that if a black man would arrive, that we would reverse the thing and treat white folks the way we do treat them. And that's the biggest fear I feel that some of the white folks have. Because if we do come into power, hire or whatever, then we will have a reverse thing. But I don't think we
I think they fear more that someone will take some of their money, more than anything else.
They're just taking
Some of it.
Yeah, I think as far as race, I'm going to speak on besides the black and white. Like, I don't get annoyed by that because I'm neither.
If you're brown.
People who know me, I'm very passionate about, I can definitely identify with the GLBT and the race, and I love that Deanna shared her story because because there's such a issue with interracial discrimination. Huge. You're too light skinned. You got the good hair, you got the bad hair. It's just you're not black, you're not too white. Same thing with any other race. And that's why you bring up history. I'm a history buff, and And I think the good thing about history is you don't want to forget it, but you want to be aware of it, and you don't want to you don't want to be stuck in. I'm saying because each of us have our own horrific history. You're black, you're white, you're Hispanic, you're Japanese. I mean, they're in turn too. Jews, disabilities. I mean, so I mean, I think that I get kind of annoyed with women, everyone. I mean, I just get kind of annoyed when it's like when people bring up race, they just forget about the in-betweens because everyone has their own story. I think.
May I have the attention, please?
It'll make her clear.
I think my goal is just like if everyone were to like at least like do some kind of investigation homework about every single type of group, not just black, white, disabilities, gay, lesbian. I mean, like there's a broad range of people who people aren't speaking up for everyone. One person has not been through it worse than another.
Computers will be shut down. Please have all of your materials checked out.
No, I gotta take control here. Deanna wanted to comment, so let's let her comment. And we got a couple questions in the audience. We'll go just a few more minutes.
See how our conversation goes from race to racism?
Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
that's what was blowing me away trying to prepare for this, because it really truly doesn't matter. Treat people like you want to be treated. If you see someone with a disability, how would I want that person to treat me? If you see a black person, a brown person, and I specifically thought about that because I saw your presentation.
Yeah.
And I did. I knew Aurelia would be part of this panel, and I was sitting there thinking, I cannot speak universally on this. I can only tell you for me.
Yeah.
If we're going to talk about race. Now, if we're going to talk about racism, then we can broaden that. I can only tell you this has been my experience. You know, I know people can treat people well, and I know this community can come together because it has come together for me. This community has nurtured me, people of all colors and races, and it can do the same thing for anyone else that it wants to do. And so it's really just about letting the personhood, let that emerge, and let's just deal with each other as people. Because I don't know, I'm not Asian, I'm not Hispanic, and can't speak I'm not white, can't speak on men. I can, but you don't want to hear it. Thank you, Betty.
You're welcome. Question here?
Okay, I don't know if the word I'm looking for is easier, but we'll just pretend that it is. Do you think that it's easier to talk about like racism and race relations because of like big news stories that have happened recently, like Hurricane Katrina, Kanye West saying that George Bush hated black people, the shooting of Trayvon Martin, because it's so like in our face? Is it easier to say this is obviously a problem?
I would think that for all the attention in the world that those cases, particularly most recently the Trayvon Martin thing, did, I don't know that it made it easier. I mean, I've always been very comfortable talking about it, but I think that it did elevate it to a larger conversation. But wow, what did it expose?
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, I refuse to let my sons, who like all kids that age wear hoodies, walk anywhere in a hoodie anymore. Telling your sons, you know, you make sure that camera can see your face when you're somewhere. You know, that's a very real thing. That's a very, very real thing. And to make sure that make sure people aren't intimidated by you. Smile. Do I not tell you these? because a woman in Florida lost her son.
Right.
You know, and it's just real, and it's terrible that you have to do that. And you might have heard me talk about that before. It's terrible, but you have to do it.
Right. But what I'm saying is like, has it made it easier to show, I guess, that racism and race relations is a problem and it needs to be talked about?
I guess. I mean, yeah, it has. Like I said, it broadened
Maybe
the
less of a
conversation. But what it
stigma
showed
about
was
it.
that his life really,
For the conversation.
it does. Yeah, I mean, it certainly has a platform, but I don't think the outcome of that case. I think it was revealing. It was telling. It revealed a lot about our justice system.
I don't know if everyone had the opportunity on YouTube to see, if you hadn't originally seen, President Obama spoke for, I think, close to 20 minutes. It's wonderful. You can find it. Just look on the channel, put in his name, put in Trayvon Martin.
Yeah.
Yes, right.
You have a comment? Question?
Yeah, I was just gonna say one thing.
I gotta let
I
you
think
speak
that-
Bob spoke. You gotta even listen.
I think one thing is that when you talk to older people about racism, a lot of them will say that it was handed down from family values, you know, and it's which is very true. You know, some people are just raised in a home where things are not seen the same as this family. But I think that instead of enforcing it and putting it out there like, bam, this is racism, bam, this is racism, why don't we be that next generation, which is our job, to raise them differently, because that's how it came in. That's how it has to lead.
And I think I see that happening. I really see that happening.
I do too. I think across the board, I think with all of these issues, I think our youth takes a lot of that bias away and they just look at each other as people.
It's happening
Thank
now.
goodness.
Yeah.
Thank goodness that they are.
And they're teaching us, thank goodness, right?
That's right.
I mean, this
Totally.
young man made a point we can all agree with.
One more question.
I just want to clarify, when I talk about privilege, privilege isn't racism. It's not. And it's not about survivor's guilt. It's about fact. It's just a legitimate fact. When you're the majority, whether it's by race or by the fact that you're straight or whatever, by virtue of being a member of the majority group, you have a privilege. That's what I'm talking about. And that's where, when Deanna talks about how, you know, the community, you know, has gone around New Hope and found ways to nurture and grow and help these people thrive, that's because the people who are in that privileged group made a choice. And that's what I was trying to apparently poorly articulate, is that those of us who are in that privileged group, in the case of race or any of these things, have a responsibility to not be passive with that privilege, but do something active with it.
Yeah.
And that's what I failed to say eloquently.
Well, let's talk about that. I want to thank everyone for participating tonight. I think for a first-time effort with very little of an agenda, I think it went very well, and thank you everyone. Typically, when I organize a new event like this, I commit to 3 years and do one annually. Since we got such a wonderful write-up in the newspaper today, we got a 3/4 page promotion. It was wonderful, I thought. Thank you to the News Journal and to the writer of that article. But I was misquoted as saying that we would do 3 this year. So I think in about 4 months, well, every 4 months, I think a conversation like this every 4 months isn't even close to the minimum that needs to be happening. But I think it's definitely doable. So please look forward in about a 4-month period, and we'll do something similar to this again. If you sign in on the list, I will include you in the planning. I would love any input, positive, negative, constructive criticism. That's very, very important. I learned a lot tonight. Here I thought I was this really balanced, knowledgeable community organizer, and I learned a lot of things tonight that I needed to learn. We didn't have enough time. There is a big difference between race and racism. But again, we have to have these conversations. We have to talk about them in a non-attacking way and allow each individual to express themselves for where they're at. And we need the youth, and we need, everything. I love the fact that, and where my asset does come from, is I approach people at a human level. And yet, I also recognize that our diversity is important. I don't want to identify with each person and say, well, you're gay, and you're black, and you're this, and you're that. I want to see them as a human being and look at those different qualities as qualities and something very positive. So, in closing, I would like to share with you that I would like to be seen as a friendly community member. That's it. That's just the way I would like to be perceived. Not as a person of white privilege, not as a North Ender so much, although it doesn't bother me because we have a great diverse community that we're working on building. So would the panel members mind sharing how they would like to be identified within the community?
A humanist.
A humanist?
Seriously, that's really how I try to identify.
You as well?
Absolutely.
As well. Now, can you imagine when I see Aurelio in the coffee shop next time, or maybe Deanna, or when I'm in Columbus, I'll call Jeannie up. We meet and I give him a hug and I say, "Hey, you humanist, how are you doing?" Wouldn't that be great though? When we start sharing that with the community, and that's another part of our task, is to take what we've learned and grown with and try to apply it out there. Would anyone else in attendance like to share the way that they would like to be identified within the community?
I'm just
Don't have
Tosh.
to. Yes.
I'll take that one.
I put down that I want to be identified as a person who cared and is trying to make my little spot a better place than what I found it.
Now, when I'm good at coffee shop, I'm gonna have to practice that for a while. But no, that's beautiful.
But humanist says it a whole lot quicker.
I'm not getting into details.
This is,